In a quiet village where life moved at a slow and steady pace, the evening sun cast a golden glow over the streets, wrapping everything in a warm, tranquil light. The faint scent of wildflowers mixed with the earthy aroma of freshly tilled soil, and the distant sound of children's laughter echoed softly through the air. Among the familiar sights of the village was Max, a playful Labrador who was well loved by everyone. Max had always been known for his boundless energy and cheerful spirit. But as the sun began to dip below the horizon, something about him changed. He stood still, his ears alert, his gaze fixed on a point far in the distance. His usually wagging tail was still, and his entire posture seemed to reflect a strange urgency, as if he could sense something beyond the comprehension of those around him. This was no ordinary evening. Max's sudden change in demeanor marked the beginning of a story that would leave everyone in the village and beyond awestruck. Without hesitation, and as if driven by an instinct that transcended words, Max prepared to act in a way that no one could have anticipated. It began with the sight of Max running through the village streets, his movements swift and purposeful, unlike his usual playful jaunts. The villagers, accustomed to seeing the friendly Labrador bounding with carefree energy, now watched in confusion as he dashed past homes and gardens, carrying something unusual in his mouth. At first glance, it seemed like a bundle, wrapped in a worn blanket, swaying slightly with each step. Max's grip was firm yet gentle, his expression marked by an urgency that drew the attention of everyone he passed. As he darted through the main square, a few curious onlookers called out to him, but Max didn't pause or even glance in their direction. His focus was unwavering, his destination clear, though no one yet understood what it was. Whispers spread among those who saw him, each trying to make sense of what the dog was carrying and where he was going. Soon, Max arrived at the hospital, a small building that served as a lifeline for the close-knit community. He stopped at the entrance, carefully placing the bundle on the ground before letting out a series of loud, insistent barks. His voice was a mixture of urgency and desperation, echoing through the quiet evening air. The hospital staff, startled by the commotion, hurried to the door to investigate. When they stepped outside, they found Max standing protectively over the bundle, his eyes shifting between the startled faces of the staff and the mysterious package he had delivered. One of the nurses crouched down, hesitantly reaching for the blanket, and as she pulled it back, a collective gasp escaped the group. Inside was a baby, fragile, silent, and barely moving. The blanket was damp and smudged with dirt, its condition hinting at a journey that had been anything but gentle. Max stood by, his panting heavy but his gaze steady, as if willing the humans to understand the importance of what they had just discovered. The scene was surreal, a dog, a baby, and an urgent mystery that would soon unravel in ways no one could have foreseen. The hospital staff moved quickly, their initial shock giving way to urgency as they carried the baby inside. The nurse who had unwrapped the bundle cradled the child in her arms, calling for a doctor as they hurried into the brightly lit emergency room. Max followed closely behind, refusing to leave the entrance, his watchful eyes fixed on the commotion inside. Inside the emergency room, the baby was carefully placed on a sterile examination table. The doctor leaned over, his experienced hands checking for signs of life. A faint but steady heartbeat reassured him, though the baby's pale skin and shallow breathing were cause for concern. "We need oxygen," he called out, his voice calm but firm, as the team sprang into action. The room filled with the quiet hum of machines and the soft rustle of hurried movements, every second feeling heavier than the last. Meanwhile, the nurse began gently cleaning the baby, revealing faint bruises along the arms and legs. The doctor's brow furrowed as he examined the marks, his mind racing with questions. "These don't look accidental," he muttered under his breath, his tone laced with concern. The room fell into a tense silence, the weight of his words settling over everyone present. Outside, Max remained steadfast, sitting at the entrance as though guarding the hospital. Occasionally, he let out a low whine, his eyes darting toward the glass doors as if asking for an update. A small crowd of villagers had gathered, murmuring in hushed tones about what the dog had done and what might happen next. Back inside, the baby began to stir faintly, a weak cry breaking the tense silence. The sound was met with a collective sigh of relief from the staff, though the bruises and the baby's fragile state left lingering questions. "Call the authorities," the doctor instructed, his voice steady but resolute. "There's more to this story, and we need to find out what happened." As the staff worked to stabilize the baby, Max's presence lingered in their minds. This dog had done something extraordinary, delivering the child to safety against all odds. Yet, as they pieced together the child's condition, a chilling realization began to dawn. The baby's journey was only the beginning of a mystery that would soon demand answers. As the baby lay stabilized in the hospital bed, a sense of unease filled the room. The bruises on the child's arms and legs weren't the only signs of distress. Upon closer examination, the doctor noticed small scratches and dirt embedded under the baby's tiny fingernails, as though the child had struggled before being wrapped in the blanket. The faint smell of damp earth still clung to the fabric. Each clue painted a picture more unsettling than the last. The authorities arrived quickly after the hospital's call. A police officer carefully inspected the blanket, noting its tattered state and the unusual stains that marred its surface. "This doesn't look like an accident," he remarked quietly, his words sending a chill through the room. Another officer began asking questions, trying to piece together the story from the fragmented observations of the hospital staff and the strange presence of the dog that had delivered the baby. Outside, Max still sat at the hospital's entrance, his eyes fixed on the door as though awaiting news. One of the officers approached him cautiously, crouching down to meet his gaze. Max let out a low, quiet bark, then turned his head, staring pointedly down the road he had come from. It was as if he was urging them to follow. The police decided to investigate, retracing Max's path through the village. With the dog leading the way, they ventured into the outskirts of the town, where the streets gave way to uneven dirt paths and overgrown vegetation. Max moved with purpose, stopping occasionally to glance back at the officers, as if ensuring they were still with him. Finally, he led them to a secluded spot near an abandoned house, its windows shattered and its exterior worn by years of neglect. Near the entrance of the house, the officers found a shallow patch of disturbed earth, scattered with remnants of torn fabric and faint traces of blood. The sight was chilling. One officer knelt to examine the ground, his face grim as he realized this was likely where the baby had been abandoned. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to come together, but the story they revealed was one of neglect, desperation, and a cruel act of abandonment. Back at the hospital, the staff worked tirelessly to ensure the baby's recovery. But as the details of the discovery began to unfold, everyone was left grappling with the same haunting question. Who could have left the child in such a vulnerable state? And how had Max known to intervene just in time? While answers remained elusive, one thing was clear. Max's instincts and courage had saved a life, uncovering a mystery that no one could ignore. The officers carefully examined the area around the abandoned house, trying to piece together how the baby had ended up in such a dire situation. Max stayed close, pacing back and forth as if urging them to move faster. His behavior was almost uncanny, as though he understood the gravity of what was happening. Near the disturbed patch of earth, one officer found faint footprints, likely belonging to an adult, leading away from the scene. Another discovered a torn piece of clothing caught on a broken fence, its fabric matching the blanket that had been wrapped around the baby. It was becoming clear that the child had been left here deliberately, in a place far from the eyes and ears of anyone who might help. But then, Max had appeared. Somehow, this dog had found the baby and acted without hesitation, using instincts that went far beyond what anyone could explain. The officers could only imagine the moment Max stumbled upon the abandoned child, his gentle nose nudging the small, fragile body, his protective instincts taking over as he realized the baby needed help. Max must have carefully picked up the baby, ensuring his teeth didn't harm the delicate skin, and started the journey toward safety. The path he had taken was not easy. Through thick brush, over uneven ground, and finally onto the streets of the village. Every step of the way, Max had carried not just the baby, but also the weight of a life depending on him. Back at the hospital, word of Max's heroic actions began to spread. Villagers who had gathered outside spoke in hushed, amazed tones, sharing their disbelief and admiration for the dog they thought they knew so well. "I've never seen anything like it," one whispered. "How could he know what to do?" Another added, "He's not just a dog, he's a guardian angel." Inside, the baby's condition was steadily improving. The nurses took turns holding the child, their hearts heavy with the thought of what might have happened if Max hadn't intervened. As the baby's tiny fingers grasped at the edge of a nurse's uniform, there was a collective sense of gratitude for the dog who had turned the tide of an unimaginable tragedy. Max, however, seemed unfazed by all the attention. He stayed close to the hospital entrance, lying down only briefly before sitting up again, his eyes scanning for updates on the baby. His actions that day had proven that heroism knows no boundaries, not of species, size, or words. It is found in instincts, in courage, and in the determination to protect the vulnerable, no matter the cost. As investigators dug deeper into the circumstances surrounding the baby's abandonment, a disturbing truth began to emerge. The torn piece of fabric found at the scene led them to a breakthrough, a match with clothing reported missing from a nearby home. Interviews with villagers revealed whispers of a troubled household on the outskirts of town, a place where arguments were often overheard, and the presence of a newborn had recently been noted, but suddenly seemed absent. With this lead, the police traced the home to a young couple struggling with poverty and personal turmoil. Upon questioning, their stories unraveled quickly. The mother, overwhelmed by her situation, admitted to leaving the baby near the abandoned house. "I thought someone might find him," she said, her voice trembling. The father, distant and uncooperative, added little, his silence heavy with guilt. It was a heartbreaking revelation, a moment of desperation that could have ended in tragedy if not for Max. Meanwhile, forensic evidence confirmed the baby's exposure to the harsh environment for several hours before Max found him. The scratches on the child's skin matched the thorny undergrowth around the abandoned house, and the dirt on the blanket matched the disturbed patch of ground where he had been left. The timeline aligned perfectly. Max had discovered the baby within hours of the abandonment, and his swift actions had likely saved the child's life. Back at the hospital, the nurses were overjoyed to see the baby's condition improving steadily. The once weak cries had grown stronger, and the faintest hint of color returned to the child's cheeks. But for the staff and investigators alike, the question lingered. How had Max known to intervene? It was a mystery that defied explanation, leaving everyone to marvel at the dog's extraordinary instincts. The baby was eventually placed into the care of Child Protection Services, ensuring a future free from harm. The young mother was offered support and counseling, while the father faced legal consequences for his neglect. Though the circumstances were tragic, the story sparked a larger conversation about the importance of community, support, and second chances. Max, however, remained blissfully unaware of the ripple effects of his actions. To him, it was simple. A life was in danger, and he had done what he needed to do. The villagers, deeply moved by his courage, rallied together to honor him. "He's not just a dog," one resident said. "He's a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there's still hope. And sometimes, it comes from the most unexpected places." Max became a hero overnight, his story spreading far beyond the quiet village. News outlets picked up the incredible tale of the dog who had saved a baby's life, and soon the world was captivated. Social media was flooded with posts praising Max's bravery, with hashtags like #CharHeroDog and Max the Savior trending globally. People couldn't get enough of the Labrador whose instincts and courage had defied all expectations. In the village, Max's life returned to normal, though it seemed like everyone wanted to see the dog who had performed such an extraordinary act. Children came by with treats, petting him and calling him a super dog, while adults marveled at how this ordinary Labrador had done something so extraordinary. For Max, however, none of this attention seemed to matter. He still played in the yard, wagged his tail at familiar faces, and waited patiently by the door for his family to come home. Local organizations reached out to the family, offering to honor Max with awards and recognition. A ceremony was held in the village square, where Max was presented with a medal for his bravery. The crowd cheered as the mayor spoke about how Max's actions had reminded everyone of the power of compassion and instinct, even in the most unlikely of heroes. Max, of course, seemed more interested in the snacks people offered him afterward than in the medal hanging around his neck. But the story didn't end there. Inspired by Max's heroism, many people in the community began to reflect on their own lives and how they could help others in need. The baby's story became a symbol of hope and resilience, with donations pouring in for local shelters, child welfare programs, and animal rescue organizations. Max's actions had not only saved a life, but also sparked a wave of kindness and generosity that spread far and wide. Even as the world moved on and other stories captured the headlines, Max's tale remained etched in the hearts of those who heard it. It was a story about instinct, bravery, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals, a reminder that heroes come in all shapes and sizes, and sometimes they have 4 legs and a wagging tail. Max had done more than rescue a baby. He had inspired a world to believe in the extraordinary. As the months passed, Max's life returned to the simplicity he had always known. He spent his days running through the fields, chasing after sticks, and basking in the warmth of the sun. But the events of that fateful day had left an indelible mark on his family and the community. They would never look at him the same way again. The village, forever changed by his actions, had grown even closer, with residents now looking out for each other more than ever before. Max's family, while still humbled by the attention, felt an overwhelming sense of pride. They knew they had always loved him, but now they saw him as more than just a pet. He was a hero, a symbol of loyalty and courage that transcended the ordinary. They often found themselves reflecting on how lucky they were to share their lives with such an incredible animal. Though the case involving the baby had been resolved, the memory of that day continued to ripple through the village. The abandoned house near the woods, once a symbol of neglect, was transformed into a place where people gathered to talk about Max's incredible rescue and the importance of kindness and responsibility. The community had come together in ways they hadn't before, drawn together by the dog who had unknowingly sparked a movement of compassion. And as for Max, he never sought any recognition. He didn't need the medals, the headlines, or the fame. He continued to do what he had always done best: love unconditionally, protect when needed, and be there for the people who needed him most. His story wasn't about the glory. It was about doing what was right without hesitation. In his quiet, humble way, Max had taught everyone the true meaning of heroism. Max's journey had been remarkable, but the impact of his actions would be felt for years to come. He had saved a life, yes, but more importantly, he had reminded everyone that acts of courage, no matter how big or small, could change the world in profound ways. And as the seasons changed, and the village went about its daily life, one thing remained certain: Max, the dog who carried a baby to safety, would always be remembered as the village's greatest hero.